Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Then my old buddy, Ross Dellinger. He's not really my buddy. He seemed like a very nice guy. Had him on the show once to promote his book. I do not know him at all, but he's a very great reporter. And he breaks the story that has been in the works for weeks, okay? So Texas and Oklahoma, we find out now about 18 months ago at SEC Media Days in 2021 that they plan on leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. And ever since then, it's kind of been this back and forth of when is it going to be? They can't get out of the contract till 2025. They want to leave earlier. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Well, on Thursday night, Ross Dellinger, and I believe he was the first one, reported that it is in fact happening, and it is going to happen a year ahead of schedule. But here's the catch. Texas and Oklahoma are going to pay the Big 12 a combined $100 million. That's like a Dr. Evil $100 million. Like that's a Dr. Evil $100 million to leave the Big 12 for the SEC. And when they say it just means more, apparently it just means more of a big check you're writing to these other leagues to get out of your contract. And so let's get into it. Let's give you the details. Let's break down as much as we can right here, because I think this is kind of a fascinating behind the scenes college sports story that there's a lot of layers to, okay? And so what I would say is that, as I often say on this show, two things in life can be true. And what I also say on this show is that we have to adjust our opinions on things as more information comes out. And you can go back, it's still in the archives, to the day that Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. And at the time, I said, I'll be blunt, guys and girls. They're going to want to get out of this contract before 2025. And I don't see any way the Big 12 lets them do it, because so much of the Big 12's revenue is produced by Texas and Oklahoma football specifically. So my thought was, at the time, they're going to suck every last dollar out of this Texas-Oklahoma money train to make sure that they make the most revenue possible before they let them move on. Here's what has happened, though, since that day at SEC Media Days a few years ago, when Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving for the Big 12. Or that was where it broke. I think they officially announced it a week or so later. But a lot has happened since then. I think, one, the Big 12 is largely stabilized, right? So you go back to that day, and it was chaos, college sports, where are we going, all that good stuff. But think about what the Big 12 has done since then. They have added 4 teams. Now, are they Texas and Oklahoma? No, they're not Texas and Oklahoma. But BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, Central Florida, and Houston are all really good football programs. They're not Texas and Oklahoma when Texas and Oklahoma reach their ceiling, but they're really good. The Big 12 has hired a new commissioner, Brett Yormark, who is a sharp guy, and we'll get into it. And I think most importantly, college sports as a whole has changed since that day at SEC Media Days in 2021 when Texas and Oklahoma said they were leaving. Think about what's happened post-Texas, Oklahoma announcing they're leaving the Big 12. 1, 2 schools where I live have decided to join the Big 10. USC and UCLA are leaders and legends now. They're tied to the hip with Purdue and Wisconsin and Iowa and Illinois. Now there's some big brands as well, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, whatever. But USC and UCLA have moved. And so college sports has changed, but here was the big thing. And this was when I started to think that Texas and Oklahoma that not only would the Big 12 let them out, that they would actually want them out before that 2025 deadline. The big news came Labor Day last year, when we found out that we are now going to have a 12-team college football playoff. And we can agree or disagree whether we shouldn't, is 12 enough, is 12 too much, whatever. But we got the 12-team college football playoff, and we got the 6 automatic bids to the 12-team college football playoff. So if you think about it, remember, 12-team college football playoff, 6 automatic bids to the 6 best conferences in college football. And so what always struck me was this is going to happen in 2024, okay? So post college football playoff expanding, you're still going to have Texas and Oklahoma in the league. Here's the problem if you're the Big 12. If you're the Big 12, you have stabilized. You have added 4 teams. You have a new commissioner. And most importantly, you've signed a new TV deal. And so the worst possible thing that could happen to the Big 12, beyond just Texas and Oklahoma leaving, that's done, they're not coming back, is that what you don't want is to go into year 1 of that college football playoff expansion to 12 teams and Texas or Oklahoma absolutely dominate and earn your college football playoff berth, because that is literally the worst thing that could happen to you, right? You spend all these years stabilizing this conference, all this time getting your ducks in a row, getting ready for the post-Texas Oklahoma years. Now imagine if Texas goes 12-0, destroys everybody in your league and goes to the college football playoff, and then they leave for the SEC the following year. It's a bad look for the league. It's a bad look for the 12 teams that are remaining. And so I always believe that the Texas-Oklahoma camps wanted this done. And increasingly over the last probably 2 or 3 months, I kind of thought the Big 12 wanted it done. And it got to be reported that the Big 12 did kind of want them out before 2025. The holdup, and I say this as somebody who I work for Fox Sports Radio, so let's get that out of the way. I work for the radio station. I work for Fox Sports Radio. I don't work for Fox TV. And I certainly don't have the ears of anybody important enough to make these big decisions. But I bring it up because what has been the holdup the last month or so is that the 2 TV networks are trying to figure out financially, how does it make sense, right? Because if you're Fox and you own the Big 12 TV rights, you don't just want to give away a bunch of Texas-Oklahoma games. That's not what you want to do. You want to keep them contractually obligated as long as possible. So over the last couple months, everyone's been trying to figure out a way to make sure that the TV partners under the current Big 12 contract with Texas and Oklahoma in it are financially compensated. There had been talk that Texas and Oklahoma would play road games in Big 12 stadiums to kind of appease that. Maybe Texas goes and plays at TCU, or Oklahoma at Kansas State, or Texas at Iowa State, or whatever in the post-SEC world where Texas and Oklahoma are in the Big 12. That was the original proposal. That did not work. So now we just get that flat fee of $100 million. And I'm not going to lie, I don't know where that money's coming from. I don't know if the SEC is going to subsidize it. From Ross Dellinger's report, it does not appear as though Texas and Oklahoma will be fully vested when they get to the SEC. In other words, they're not going to be a full partner getting full TV revenue. But what became increasingly clear was that everybody wanted Texas and Oklahoma out in 2024. Texas and Oklahoma, the Big 12, the SEC obviously wanted them, but it was about getting the money right with the TV partners, which apparently they did. When you write a check for $100 million, that's going to quiet a lot of doubts. So that's how it all came about. Now I think we get to talk about the ripple effects from it. And let me just say this. Have we really taken the time to think about how awesome it's going to be to have Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC? Now, I get that Oklahoma is going in the wrong direction under Brent Venables. And to his credit, he recruited well, portal well, all that good stuff. So maybe they get it figured out. Texas has been Texas. They appear to be on an upward trajectory. Won 8 games this year. Quinn Ewers back next year. Arch Manning coming in. But even if they're not great, just think about what those 2 brands coming to this league means. Just think about the fact that Texas played at Arkansas a few years ago. Sam Pittman's Hogs smacked them around. It was one of the best road environments in college football that I saw all last year. So you have that element of it. You have the fact that just think about the games that we're going to get in the next few years. Texas at Georgia. Georgia at Oklahoma, Oklahoma at Florida, Alabama at Oklahoma. Oh, by the way, Texas A&M, it's going to happen at some point. The Longhorns are going to go to College Station. The Aggies are going to go to Austin. Georgia, Florida, LSU, Auburn, now Texas, Oklahoma. It's going to be great. Have you thought about how awesome it's going to be? What I would also say is, in terms of the ripple effects, this does expedite the process of figuring out what SEC football looks like going forward. Now, again, this is the big question that's next, right? Everyone's wondering what happens. We have obviously the 2 divisions, right? The East and the West. And the question becomes, do we keep the 2 divisions? Do we have Texas and Oklahoma in the West? Does somebody go East? Do we have a situation where we do 4 4-team pods? But then also there's the other situation as well. Do we stick with 8 SEC regular season games, or with 2 new teams, do we add a 9th? If you add the 9th, and I've talked about this many times, but it sets up what's called the 6-3 scheduling model. It means that you keep 3 annual rivals, but here's the cool part. So if you're, say, Tennessee, you get Georgia, Florida, and Alabama every year. That's just hypothetical. I don't know if those would be the teams. Vanderbilt, Florida, and Georgia. Okay, whatever. You get those 3 teams every year. But if under the 6-3 model, here's what's cool. You would get all of the other SEC teams at home within a 4-year cycle, and you would play every team in a 2-year cycle. So if you're, say, I think Georgia and Texas A&M have played one time since Texas A&M got to the SEC in 2012, I think was the year. Well, under the 6-3 model, Texas A&M would have their 3 annual rivals, probably Texas, Oklahoma, and maybe LSU. I don't know. They'd have their 3 annual rivals, but then they would play every other team, 6 in one year, 6 in another. That's 12 overall, plus the other 3 that you're playing annually. That means you're playing every team in the league every other year. And then here's the cool part. In a 4-year cycle, you play every team in your home and road venue every other year. So Texas A&M, I don't believe, has ever hosted Georgia since they got to the SEC. Well, now Georgia's coming to College Station once every 4 years. You're playing Georgia once every 2 years. It eliminates divisions. It helps with, say, an Ole Miss or an Arkansas that always has the schedule stacked against them, where a South Carolina or Vanderbilt always has the schedule stacked for them. So it's an interesting scenario. I believe this is the next step. When the ADs and coaches get together in June, my guess is that they set up the 6-3 model, which means that you'll be playing every opponent every other year except for your 3 rivals. Really quickly, couple other thoughts. One, from the actual on-the-field football perspective, you know who the 2 biggest losers were on Thursday with this news? Steve Sarkisian and Brent Venables. Because I think at the end of the day, now listen, I think Steve Sarkisian being a year ahead, I think Texas was a little bit ahead on NIL. They're probably in a little bit of a better position to jump into the SEC right now. Top 5 recruiting class in 2023, excuse me. Top 5 recruiting class in 2022. So they've got a couple classes stacked. Young offensive line. Post-NIL world, they have really stacked up in the trenches. Young quarterback with Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning coming in. Arch Manning brought some really high-profile players with him. So, but I still think if you really gave Steve Sarkisian some truth serum, if you really got him to be honest, I'm guessing that he probably would have liked one more year in the Big 12 to build this roster to get some, games against, I don't know, Kansas and whoever, as opposed to jumping into the SEC. I also think Brent Venables, it's the same thing, right? Because Brent Venables is, whether you agree or disagree about how big the rebuild was, because Oklahoma fans are trying to tell you they had to tear this thing down and build it up from Lincoln Riley, even though Lincoln Riley, all he did was win Big 12 titles except for his final year. But Brent Venables, to his credit, has done a great job in recruiting. This past cycle, really good class, top 10 class. This was his first full cycle. They did really good in the portal, a lot of guys up front. But I still think if Brent Venables had his druthers, he would have loved another year to build up these rosters. And then finally, from the basketball perspective, I'll just say this really quick. I think there's a reasonable chance that neither of the coaches at Texas and Oklahoma ever coaches a game in the SEC. Obviously at Texas, we'll see what happens with Rodney Terry. I think he's doing an unbelievable job with this program right now. But I don't know if his future is as the Texas head coach. I don't know if they're going to replace him no matter what he does. I don't know what he has to do to keep that job. And then Porter Moser at Oklahoma. He's struggling. The rumor on the street is he is trying to angle his way into the Notre Dame job. He's got a huge buyout in his contract. Maybe Oklahoma gets some money from Notre Dame to help pay their $50 million or whatever they got to pay to the SEC. But I would be surprised. I don't want to say I'd be surprised. I think it's not inconceivable that neither Texas or Oklahoma has the same head coach now that they will when they enter the Big 12, enter the SEC in 2024.